This is a joke about three guys, Bill, Jim, and Scott. And they were going to a convention, they had traveled to another city to go to a convention, and they were staying at a very tall hotel, and they were on the top floor, the 75th floor, in a beautiful big suite, huge suite. And they went from the hotel to the convention center and had their meetings, and the meetings were all day long. And after a long day of meetings, they were shocked to hear when they got back to the hotel that the elevators in the hotel were broken, and they would have to climb 75 flights of stairs to get up to their suite. So Bill said to Jim and Scott, let's break the monotony of this really unpleasant task of climbing 75 flights of stairs by concentrating on something interesting. Let's each take a part of it. So for the first 25 flights, I'll tell some jokes. And for the second 25 flights, Jim, you're a singer, why don't you sing some songs? And then the last 25, Scott, why don't you tell some sad stories along the way? You're a storyteller, so tell us some sad stories. So they do that. So they began going up, and Bill began telling jokes. And when they got to the 26th floor, Bill stopped telling jokes and Jim began to sing. So for the next 25 flights of stairs, Jim sang songs. And then when they got to the 51st floor, where they changed over, Jim stopped singing and Scott began to tell his sad stories. And Scott said this, he said, I'm going to tell my saddest story first. And the other two said, yes, what is that? As they continued to climb. And Scott said, my saddest story is this. I left our room key back in the car. All right.
Well, that was a good one. Thank you. What I didn't mention is that Reverend Joel has agreed to take some questions, if you have them, when he is done with his talk, and I think after the treatment today, so that your talk is on spiritual mind treatment, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so if you do have any questions, we'd be able to take a couple when he's done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's talk. Truthfully, this topic, spiritual mind treatment, I could talk about for hours. And those of us who love spiritual mind treatment could talk about this for hours. So sit back, we're gonna take a few hours and go through this. No, I'm kidding. So this last week, I was having a conversation with a colleague, and this is a colleague who's, he was in the accounting department at our company, and he's very, very left brain. Nothing bad about that. That's a good thing. He's very left brain. He's very religious. He's an interesting guy. But anyway, we were talking, and I said something, and I used the word spirituality, and he stopped me, and he said, "What do you mean when you say the word spiritual?" Because he said, "I've heard people say spiritual but not religious," and he said, "I have no idea what that means." And I had to stop for a second because, in our little bubble, when we talk about this stuff all the time, we use the word spiritual a lot, but I forgot that outside of our bubble, this is all still new to some people. So I had to think about it. And I said, well, for me, religion is an explanation, and it's the rules, it's the dogma about the divine, whereas spirituality is the experience of the divine, the actual experience. Religion is head, and spirituality is the soul or the heart. And that's what today's talk is going to be about. We're going to talk about spiritual mind treatment, and we're going to use Ernest Holmes' chapter 11 in our exploration of the Power of series. We've talked about the power of thought, the power of prayer, the power of faith. Next week is the power of love and mothers. But today it's the power of spiritual mind treatment. And rather than talk about the full explanation of spiritual mind treatment or the effects of spiritual mind treatment, I want to talk about the experience of spiritual mind treatment, which really encompasses everything. And I'm going to give you 4 different ways to think about spiritual mind treatment in your life. You may already have an idea that spiritual mind treatment is just a prayer, and affirmative prayer, and we do it sometimes. But I'm going to give you 4 different ways to think about it in our lives. Now, in chapter 11 of the textbook, Ernest Holmes gives an overview of spiritual mind treatment, which we often say, of course, is akin to affirmative prayer. And as Reverend Michelle said recently in one of her talks, don't get hung up on the words prayer, treatment, or spiritual mind treatment. In this talk, I'm going to use them interchangeably. They're essentially the same thing from our perspective. And spiritual mind treatment, affirmative prayer, is based on the most basic of science of mind ideas, which I talked about in my last talk, which is there's a power for good in this universe greater than you, and you can use it. That's the basic idea behind science of mind. There's a power for good in this universe greater than us, and we can use it. But how do we use it is the question. And in this chapter, Ernest Holmes says the how do we use it is spiritual mind treatment. It's the main thing we teach. So when I began this walk of the science of mind journey many, many years ago, back in the late 80s and early 90s, back then I thought of prayer really as just getting what I want or getting rid of what I don't want in my life. Prayer is a petition. I would pray for money. I would pray for relationships. I prayed for a car. I prayed for more of what I wanted. I prayed, please take a one. One of my relatives got prayed, please kill that. Pray from the viewpoint of praying to someone out there. I still at that time thought of God as someone out there that I petitioned to help me. And that type of prayer is always focused on what I lacked. I didn't have enough money, so please God, give me more. I didn't have this, so please God, give me that. This person has that, so please God, etc. Now, Ernest Holmes in this chapter, chapter 11, on page 164, says this about prayer. He says, in treatment, we turn entirely away from the condition, because as long as we look at it, we cannot overcome it. And by looking at it, I think he means looking at it from the viewpoint of being a victim of it or being powerless in a situation or powerless against a person. And he's, like I was powerless against my small salary, or I was focused on these things. And Ernest Holmes then goes on to say, by thinking upon a condition, this is wild, by thinking upon a condition, we tend to animate it. Hang on, I'm reading from it. Okay, we tend to animate it with the life of our thought, and thereby it is perpetuated and magnified. That's pretty clear. We animate it, which perpetuates it and magnifies it. So the very things we're praying about, we are creating and magnifying more of it in our lives. Well, have you ever met anybody who can tell you everything that's wrong or lacking in their lives in a very animated way? And when they talk about it, they magnify it for effect. We probably have all done that in some ways, but Ernest Holmes tells us here to turn away from the condition, no matter how much we want to moan or complain, no matter how much sympathy we get for the condition on Facebook when we post it, we turn away from it. But the question then is, what do we do then? If we're turning away from it, then what do we turn toward? Ernest Holmes says, still on page 164, he says, treatment is not willing things to happen. It is to provide within ourselves an avenue through which they may happen. That's important. And in a sense, I think that's the spiritual path in a nutshell. Not willing things to happen, trying to make them happen. Oh, if only I pray hard enough, I can get what I want. But instead, in a sense, we clear ourselves out so that we can open ourselves to become the very path through which that thing can come to us, which is through us. But back then, I wasn't there yet. Back when I first started to study the science of mind, that was such a huge change to turn my idea of prayer from petitioning a God out there to going within. And even now, I mean, I feel like this is so ingrained in a lot of us, many of us, that even now I still hear people in the movement who have been in this movement for many years. They say things like, you know, I hope God lets me such and such, or God willing, or, you know, please God, just give me this one thing, or whatever. And it's duality. It's duality. That's petitioning for something you want, praying for just what we want or what's hurting. That's when we're actually praying from the level of our ego, because we're focusing on what we don't want or what we don't have. And then we pray prayers to bring us back to being comfortable. In a sense, those prayers are saying, God, I'm uncomfortable. So please, God, out there, solve this problem for me so I can go back to being comfortable and go back to sleep. That's really what that kind of prayer is. But the spiritual path isn't about that. It's not about our ego, and it's not about the things that we think we want. The spiritual path itself is about the soul's journey. It's about us being who we are meant to be. That's a whole talk on itself, and we'll do that another time. But with treatment, eventually back then, when I first was new to learning about spiritual mind treatment, one of the ways that began to change the way I thought about treatment, which I want to talk about, is I kept studying it, I kept learning about it, but most of all, I kept using it. That's the most important thing. And one thing that really did change my viewpoint of it is the church that I was going to, Mile High Church. They did this program every year. They may still do it, I don't know. This was back, like I said, in the late 80s and early 90s. And they did this program every year that they called Adventures in Prayer. I think it was 6 weeks or 8 weeks, something like that. But it was a program that they did every single year. And it was called Adventures in Prayer, and was all about how how powerful prayer was when we let it be powerful in our lives. That was revolutionary for me to even think about it. So what they were saying in those weeks, every single year they did it, which was great, was that we can begin to have a relationship with prayer, and that prayer could be something that is a way to open myself up to a life greater, not just to get what I want, but to see life in a different way, to experience life in a different way, to use prayer as a way to live life as an adventure. That was mind-blowing for me. Adventures in prayer. I can have a relationship with it. This is the key, that if we keep using spiritual mind treatment in our life, we will begin having a relationship with the idea of spiritual mind treatment, and then we'll go on to have a great adventure in life, the life that you, me, us, we were all meant to live. Now, that's one way to look at it, that spiritual mind treatment is an invitation to an adventure in life. Here's another way. As I mentioned earlier, spiritual mind treatment is a form of affirmative prayer. It's our method. It's not the only method in the world, but it is our method, and it's an incredibly powerful method of prayer. It's what we use in the science of mind philosophy, powerful, and it's got 5 steps. Most of you already know what the 5 steps are, but very briefly, 5 steps. Recognition, that's when we recognize that there's one power, one presence in this world. This one power is the one mind, the creator. This is God the good, etc. Unification is the second one. That's when, after recognizing that there's just one power, we now accept that me and this thing, this power, are one thing. That we are each, I am a manifestation, you are a manifestation of the divine, so therefore we are the one together. 3, realization. This is when we realize without doubt or reservation that the good that I desire is now taking form in my life. The best, the highest, the greatest that I can imagine is now taking form in my life. That's realization. 4th is thanksgiving. That's the step of gratitude or feeling joy about this truth. And 5th is release, which is when we release the treatment into what we call law or subjective mind, or what the old early New Thoughters used to say, to the ethers. And that's spiritual mind treatment in a nutshell. In chapter 11, Ernest Holmes goes into more detail about it and different forms of it and why and when we should use it. But going back to when I first learned about spiritual mind treatment, in that very first class that I took at that Center Mile High, back then it was called, the first class that you took was called Science of Mind 1. And you would do Science of Mind 1, Science of Mind 2, Practitioner 1, Practitioner 2. And I was Science of Mind 1, brand new. And the person teaching that class was a practitioner, a woman who had been a practitioner for many years. And somebody in that class, as she was explaining spiritual mind treatment and affirmative prayer, somebody said to her, how long should a treatment be? Now, I was expecting her to say, 2 minutes or 3 minutes, maybe. Although in my mind, I remember thinking, what do you talk about for 3 whole minutes? How do you pray for 3 whole minutes? I can't imagine. But what her answer was something completely different. She said, I try to think of spiritual mind treatment as something that I do throughout the day. She said, so for instance, I wake up and as I'm getting ready for work, I start a spiritual mind treatment. She said, I go to the bathroom and start getting ready and I start doing my spiritual mind treatment out loud, saying it out loud. And she said, and then I just keep going on. And when I'm in the shower, I keep doing the treatment out loud. And then I go down and have breakfast and I'm still doing the treatment. And she said, then I get in my car and I'm continuing the treatment out loud. And the whole way I'm driving to work, I'm doing the treatment. And she said, and then I try to end that treatment just as I'm pulling into the parking spot at work. I mean, that's a long time. That's a really long time. And at those early days, I thought, how can somebody do that? But what she was trying to tell us was, rather than wake up and put on the news and dread the day, that she used spiritual mind treatment to soak her mind in spirit all day long. That's amazing. That's an adventure. That's really a phenomenal way of thinking of spiritual mind treatment. That is something that we can elevate our minds all day long. A few years ago, one of the ministers in Centers for Spiritual Living, I believe his name is John Waterhouse, he wrote a book about spiritual mind treatment, which I think we have available if you are interested in reading it. But the book has this really brilliant title. It's called The 5 Steps to Freedom. Now, I've read the parts of the book. It's a very good book. I recommend it. But that title is brilliant. It's just brilliant. I love it so much. And if you think about it, so we went through the 5 steps very quickly. And what he's saying, what that title says to me, is that each one of those 5 steps, each one of them is like an invitation onto a path to the freedom that spirituality leads us to. Each one of them. We can do just one, pick one, and it will lead you to freedom. 5 steps to freedom. So for instance, if you pick the first one, recognition, And you really just said, today I'm going to do recognition. I'm going to just do this step and do it fully and completely. And you sit down and you spend your day immersed in just that idea of oneness. You spend your time, you begin your mornings, you end your day, and in between, as often as you can, you bring your attention back to the fact that there really is just one power in this universe. That this power is a power for good, and that it's so complete that there's no place beyond the power, that there's no person beyond the power, that there's no thing that is not part of this oneness. And if you meditate on that, oh my gosh, can you imagine just how amazing? Because anything that happens to you that day, you connect it as part of the one power, as part of recognition is recognizing that one truth, that we're all one. That will lead you to freedom. Or say you decided to just do the second step, which is unification, and made that your one step for the whole day. Well, then you would begin your day and end your day and spend all of the day reminding yourself that you're not separate from anything or anyone. That if this one power created everything, that everything you see and every person you meet, you are one with. Everyone, without exception, including and especially the ones that we don't want to be in the circle of oneness. That we are one with all things, everything. We are one with, we are unified with. Can you imagine spending a day just thinking of that? That would take you to freedom. Or let's do the third step, which is realization. And you spend the day, you begin your day, you end your day, and as many times throughout the day as you can, you spend the time thinking to yourself that you realize, you go beyond asking. You take stock of everything you already have, all the people in your life, all the opportunities, and then you to all of those areas that you know spiritually are already true. And you invite them to become true for you right now. And every person that you meet, you invite those qualities and truths to become true for them right now. That would be an amazing way to spend the day. That would bring you to freedom. Or if we just focus on the fourth step, Thanksgiving. I mean, if you began each day and ended each day and spend as much time as you can each day remembering to be grateful for everything that you can see and touch, every person, every thought, every book, everything. You are in a state of thanksgiving all the time. And when you are in a state of gratitude, that spiritual gratitude, then if a problem arose, you wouldn't complain. You would say, thank you. Thank you, life, for sending me this opportunity to shine brightly in this situation. Or if there was a difficult person that came into your life, you wouldn't say, oh, what a blank hole. You wouldn't say, oh my gosh, I can't believe it, and then call 10 friends to tell them all the horrible things this person would do. You would say, thank you, life. Thank you, life, for giving me this opportunity to shine a mirror of light towards this person, to be the light and love and remind this person or these people who have forgotten that we are brothers and sisters, that we are one with the one. Can you imagine going to bed every night feeling so grateful for every single thing that had happened? That would lead you to freedom. And the fifth, what if we spent the day every morning when we woke up and at night when we go to bed, and as many times throughout the day on the fifth step, release. You let go of every thought. Just letting go of every thought that holds you back. Every thought that's negative, let it go. I didn't say don't think it. I said that when it comes, let it go. Let it go. Let go of every person. Let go of every situation. Let go of every challenge. Let go of everything that you think has ever held you back. Every day, you let go of anything that prevents you from remembering oneness, so that you release everything that you have inside. And by the time you go to bed at night, you are empty of the world and filled with spiritual truth. That would lead you to freedom. Now imagine if you did all 5 of those steps in a row. How would that feel? That is spiritual mind treatment. Spiritual mind treatment is not just something small that we can do for 2 minutes like I thought. Spiritual mind treatment is truly 5 brilliant, shining paths to freedom that when we put them together are life changing. And I don't use that lightly. So 5 paths to freedom, and we have prayer as an adventure that we can do throughout the day. Here's the third way to think about spiritual mind treatment. So I watched a YouTube video a few years ago on Rio de Janeiro. I like to watch YouTube videos about different cities in different parts of the world because I love to travel. I love to see different parts of the world. I know a lot of you are fellow travelers as well. And YouTube is just like the easiest, cheapest way to travel the world. And you get to meet people and see things that you would never see. So I watched one on Rio de Janeiro a few years ago that I remember. And it was a video of how this guy was standing where he was standing in front of some steps. And these are, I don't know if these are famous steps in Rio or whatever, but they were steps that would lead higher and higher. And it was kind of like steps and then a terrace, like an overlook, and then more steps and an overlook, etc. And then eventually there were some trams at the top. And this path led to like this high, incredibly high spot of Rio de Janeiro. And I watched the video, and he began the video, like I said, at the first level. And that first level, he panned the camera around, and basically what you saw was where he was beginning. It was not in a nicer area of Rio. It looked like it was a poorer area. There was lots of trash around. The buildings were small structures with tin roofs, and it looked like maybe one of the poorer areas. Rio certainly, as well as many other cities, is known for having kind of a real gap in poverty and wealth. And so he was starting in an area that was probably in one of those areas and lots of need of repair. That's where he started. And then he started walking up the stairs, and he got to that first little terrace area, and he panned the camera around, his phone camera around. And, you know, you could basically just see what you just saw, but from a little higher point of view. You could now see the roofs of the shacks or buildings that were around, and you could see that the roofs, many of them were rusted and things like that. You couldn't see really much more than that, but you were beginning to go higher. Then he climbed the steps more to the next terrace area and panned the camera around. And you could see some more buildings, but it still was kind of pretty much the same. Then he went to the next area, to the next terrace, overlook, panned the camera around, and you could see larger parts of the city. You could see kind of that neighborhood, but you could begin to see other neighborhoods and a park and some buildings, and you were beginning to see more of the city. He went up more stairs, another terrace, another overlook, panned the camera around. And now you could kind of see Rio, the Rio that I think of when I look at pictures, the recognizable parts of Rio. And he was now high enough that you could see buildings, you could see skyscrapers, you know, you could see the city. It just looked more like a city. And from that point, though, to go higher, he had to take a tram. So he took the tram, and it went up, up, up. It was really slow. It was just like I remember it was just like on these little cables. And I thought, oh my goodness. And he went higher and higher to the next terrace, the next overlook. And from there, it was beautiful. I mean, it was it's Rio. It was beautiful. And from that point, you could see all the districts of the city and some of the bay and the hills and the skyscrapers. And you could see the shacks and you could see the mansions and everything in between. You could see the sun shining on the buildings. And in that, the man in the video said, "Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful up here." And it was. I mean, it was beautiful. And then there was one more tram higher, and it was a really long, and it was just like, when you look at it, it's just like these little tiny ropes that this tram was going up and up and up and up and up. And finally it got to that top part. It was so high. And at that top part, there was a lookout, and it had a building, and it had a restaurant, and it had some benches. It was so high that it was literally breathtaking. I mean, the clouds were like right there. It was really, really high. And from that area, you could see all of the city, but you could see beyond the city as well. You could see the area around the city. You could see the vegetation. You could see the sea. You could see that big statue of Jesus that's out there. You could see everything. And when you looked down at that city, it was all one. It was one city. The good, the bad, it all came together in a whole, one whole. And the man in the video said that he had never seen anything like it. And even on YouTube, it was kind of next level view. The city, the water, the sky, the trees, it all came together in a way where you could see it all and you could love it all of it. In a sense, treatment is like this. We start on the ground before treatment and we don't see much. In fact, we see really what is just in front of us. And often we just see what isn't right, like I did when I said I saw the trash and the rusty roofs. We just see what's wrong. But treatment takes us higher and higher so that we can get a better view. And the higher we go, the more we can see everything. And when we do that, it's all one thing. Treatment allows us to see all of life as one thing. Now, let's look at one other way to think about spiritual mind treatment. And this one comes to us from a book written by a Christian theologian named Richard Foster. The book was called Prayer, Finding the Heart's True Home, which I read many, many, many years ago, and it made a really big impression on me, and you'll find out why. And in this book, he says that the act of prayer itself has three motions, okay? The three motions are inward, upward, and outward. And what he says in that book is really true about spiritual mind treatment as well. Ernest Holmes says in the spiritual mind treatment, in the science of mind rather, he says that prayer is a movement of thought within the mind of one praying along a definite line. These three movements that Richard Foster writes about in this book is what Ernest Holmes meant about that definite line. It's the movement of thought. Spiritual mind treatment is a movement of thought along a definite line. So the three movements briefly: inward, that's the first one, inward, moving inward. It's letting prayer point you away from the world, away from what is possible and not possible in the world, away from the past, away from what you think you know, away from all of your experiences and all those stories we tell ourselves over and over and over again. We turn away from the news and we turn away from everything, all the noise, and we turn inward so that we can be inwardly focused rather than outwardly focused. Inward rather than seeing only the effects of our life. Going in means beginning to climb those stairs in Rio. We don't stay there. We don't stay at the bottom of the stairs. We don't stay at those terraces. We keep climbing. We climb the stairs of our thoughts. Foster calls this motion of prayer, this motion inward, he calls it transformation. We no longer are looking out there in a world or even a God that is out there. We don't look out there for answers. We follow the roadmap that life, capital L, life, has set for us, which leads inward. But we don't stop there. The second motion of prayer, according to this author, once we've gone inward, is upward. Continuing the metaphor of that YouTube video, going up in prayer is like going up those stairs, up the trams. The more we focus on going higher, the greater view we have. Where when we don't get very high, we're stuck in the world of effects. We're still stuck in the stories we make up. But when we do our treatments, we climb higher spiritually. We climb vibrationally. Foster calls this movement upward, he calls it intimacy. Why does he call it intimacy? Because we become intimate through this movement upward with the divine, not someone out there, but the divine suddenly becomes so close to us, it's as close as our breath. We and the divine become one. And it's from this vantage point that we can see further. Like at that top level from that YouTube video of Rio, we're no longer focused on the small because now we can see the whole picture. We're not stuck in limitations. We're now in the realm of possibilities. So much more is possible. And then there's that third motion of prayer. So we went inward, upward, and now outward. Whoosh. This is the amazing one. You see, when many of us begin prayer, we do it so that we can see something different in the effects of our life. But when we see differently from the vantage point of on high, it would happen that will effects in our as the effect would be different as we become different. That's the great outcome of prayer, that praying literally makes us different. For those of us on the spiritual path, it doesn't really stop there, right? You see, Foster calls this third motion of prayer, this outward, he said the first one, which was inward, he called it transformation. The second one, upward, he called it intimacy. But this third motion of prayer, he called it something I wasn't expecting. I thought he was going to call it something like achievement or excelling or something, but he calls it ministry. Ministry. In science of mind language, what he means is that if you go inward enough, and if you go upward enough, then when you come back outward, you are a changed person and cannot come back to the same place in the same way. In other words, using our metaphor, you can come back down from the highest spot of Rio, but you cannot see Rio in the same way as when you began. Because when you were on high, you saw it as all one, which means that now when you come down, you cannot see anything as separate any longer. You cannot turn a blind eye to anything. Spiritual masters tell us that term alchemy isn't literally turning lead into gold. It's a spiritual change of seeing what we always saw, but in a different way. Of Course in Miracles calls that a shift in perspective, a miracle. It's the same thing. We come out of prayer, out of spiritual mind treatment, not just with knowing higher, but also with committing to being higher. So you can see that spiritual mind treatment isn't just some little prayer we do when things get tough. And then when things are fine, we forget about spiritual mind treatment until the next time things are tough. And then oh yeah, maybe I should do a treatment about it. Spiritual mind treatment, according to science and mind philosophy, is literally the way to live life. Spiritual mind treatment is an adventure. Spiritual mind treatment contains 5 paths to freedom. Spiritual mind treatment is a way to elevate your perspective so high that you can have a totally different understanding of life. And spiritual mind treatment is a way to go in, up, and outward again so that we become walking beacons of the divine. So in closing, I'm going to say this. Rumi said, and I got this in one of the emails that the Spiritual Centers for Spiritual Living sent out this week. It says, Rumi said this: wherever you stand, be the soul of that place. Through prayer, you take that understanding with you. You can be healed. You're not at the mercy of anything or anyone. You are free. From the highest level of thought, from the 5 steps of freedom, from bringing prayer inward, upward, and outward, we have in spiritual mind treatment the complete spiritual experience. We become the vessel that God works in and through. We become the tool of the divine to bring that elevated experience wherever we are. We don't wait for other people to do it first, and we don't rely on other people to do it first. We are it. We become the catalyst for good in this world. We are the links, and through spiritual mind treatment, we become the light. So I'm going to end this by giving us a spiritual mind treatment, and then if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Let's just move into these 5 steps of freedom. Once we know that they are 5 steps to freedom, we can't think of them any other way other than portals to infinite possibilities. We begin knowing that there is just one power. We begin knowing that this creative thought, this one mind, is all there is. There's just one. There is only one power, and it is God the Good. It indeed is the oneness, the truth, the highest and the greatest, the allness, the infinite. And right now, I unify myself with that, and I know that for every person listening to these words, that I am and we are one with that one. How could we not be? If there's nothing outside of the one, because there is only the one, then that includes me and all of you. We are all one with the one. And in this oneness, in this awareness, we become totally unified with that truth, that power, that presence. And in this knowingness, the one is so us, so real, that we can feel it, we can breathe it, and we know it. And from that place, we move to realization, which is the knowing that all of the qualities of spirit are now made manifest in my life and in each one of our lives. Truth, peace, goodness, love, kindness, breath, space, everything that we need is given to us before we even know we need it. We trust in life so fully that we know we are always guided and directed in the right ways at the right time, at all times. And we claim that. And we're so grateful for it. We're so grateful. Because when we know this, how could we be anything other than flowing with gratitude for this truth that is life, that is God the good, as me, as you in this world? And we release this right now to the law, to that subjective mind, to the ethers, knowing that as I speak these words, they go out and then they manifest right here and right now, mightily, powerfully, and clearly for each one of us. And with this as our truth, together we all say, and so it is. So
Thank you, Reverend Joel.
if there are questions, I'm happy to answer.
I haven't seen any in the chat, but does anybody have a question?
I do.
Yes,
With
Michelle.
respect to speaking it out versus mentally doing it internally, do you think that that makes a difference, Reverend Joel?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when that first teacher, that first practitioner was teaching it in that early class I mentioned, the Science of Mind 1 class, and she said it out loud, it was very helpful for me, especially as I was learning spiritual mind treatment, to say it out loud because I could stay focused with it. Another way of saying it is I was more in it by saying it out loud. Because sometimes when I was doing it just inside, I would get distracted easily. That's just me. So I think it just depends on what works best and what makes it more real. Now I can do both, and they're both very powerful. But I think, it depends on how comfortable you are with it and how much if you are somebody who usually does it just inside your head, try it the other way and see what dimension that brings to you. It would be really interesting to know.
Good point. And God Day, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah, Reverend
Hello.
Joel. Yeah, you said you talked about um, the power for good in the universe and how we are one with that same power. Um, doesn't that suggest that people most likely would still want to believe or pray to the external God for situations or conditions that they feel is beyond their control?
I'm not sure I understand fully the question.
Now, you started by saying that there's some people who pray to an external God to solve the problems that they have or that they perceive.
The God outside of us.
The God outside, yeah.
Yeah.
And we are a subset of that God. We are one with that, with the infinite, right?
Right.
Now, conditions that you 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 see as being unimaginable or on conditions that you have no solutions to. Doesn't this suggest that you would want to leave it to that God to fix for you?
Yes.
For example, yes, that's naturally you're suggesting that we are a subset of the good, the
Yes.
the infinite.
Yes.
Now there are some conditions. I don't want to be hypothetical now, but I have to cite some conditions. One, for example, a doctor having his relative dying and he can't solve it. He can't fix it. He's a doctor, but he can't solve that problem. Yet, he can't even say, okay, I leave it to the God to solve for me. Doesn't that suggest that we still have the God to depend on one way or the other?
Yeah. So thank you. That's great. And I hope I'm understanding it correctly. So here's the difference. In the prayer where we petition the God outside of us, we are passive. We're saying, you solve this problem for me. You make it happen and you solve the problem. But through spiritual mind treatment, what we do is we elevate our thoughts so that there is no you out there. There's only one, which includes me, which in your hypothetical includes the doctor, it includes the nurses, it includes the person that drove you to the hospital, it includes everybody and everything, so that I am now one with all of it, and it can the healing can come through me because I'm now not seeing it as being at the mercy of something out there, which is passive. I'm now actively involved in my own healing in this situation, in that hypothetical. So when we think of it as something removed from us, we've created duality. There's me and there's God, and I really hope that that God solves it for me. Versus now there's just me as God, which means that there's you as God, which means Patricia's God and Joe's God, and all of us are. And from that place, we're now in a completely different vibration, and I'm now actively involved in the very situation. I don't have to rely on something out there because I am now one with it, and it is now one with me, using me and everyone around me. In that treatment I gave, I said something about, usually I don't remember the words of the treatment. They just kind of come, but I think I said something like, we are now each guided and directed toward I can't remember how I said it, but what I meant was, we're always, when we live in that active place of oneness, everywhere we go, we are guided and directed towards our highest, because there can't be anything other than that. That every person we meet, when we are plugged in, we're plugging them in too. If you've ever been in a room with somebody who's very, very connected spiritually, very high spiritually, you walk in the room and the energy just lifts everyone in the room suddenly. That's a very different experience than being passive and saying, God, you solved this problem for me. That's a very low vibrational experience. But when I'm engaged and life is engaged through me, I'm lifting every single one up that is in and around me as well. I'm literally bringing us all up. You're bringing everyone up to that higher level.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you for the questions. I think it's time to move on. Then Reverend Joel, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it. Lynette?